Welcome to the Voices for Voices podcast, sponsored by Redwood Living. Thank you for joining us today. I am founder Justin Allen Hayes, Executive Director and founder of Voices for Voices, host and humanitarian. You can learn more about Voices for Voices on our Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube channel at Voices for Voices and our website, voicesforvoices.org. Voices for Voices is a 501c3 nonprofit charity organization that survives solely on donations. So if you are able to, please consider heading over to voicesforvoices.org to help us continue our mission and the goal and dream to help 3 billion people over the course of my lifetime and beyond. Or you can also send a donation to the mailing address of Voices for Voices at 2388 Beckett Circle, Stow, Ohio, 44224. Or you can also make a donation on the Cash App at Voices for Voices. Are you or somebody you know looking for a volunteer opportunity? If so, you can reach out to us today via email at president@voicesforvoices.org. Now, I founded Voices for Voices to share and provide a platform for folks to share their stories with others as we work to break the stigma around mental health, accessibility, and disabilities, helping people get the help they need while also helping them prepare and/or transition into the workforce with the Voices for Voices Career Center, where we connect talent with opportunity for both job seekers and employers alike, from coast to coast and in every industry and job level. And who can forget about merchandise? The Voices for Voices merch shop is finally up and running at voicesforvoices.org/shop, where shipping is always free, and again, all donations are 100% tax deductible. Today's guest joining us is Fox News Radio, White House, and Capitol Hill correspondent based in Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming to the show Ryan Schmelz. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, Justin. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, and digging in a little bit more into your story and your past. Very relevant to for you to share your story and voice once again and share it. And as you've mentioned, if you can touch one person's life, help them prevent a situation or get them the help that they need, then it is well worth it. So thank you for being willing and being brave to talk about some tough topics.
Oh, absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I think it's an important conversation to be having. So really big kudos to you for doing this.
You're welcome. So let's jump right into it. I think sometimes society, for whatever reason, thinks of the term sexual abuse as, oh, well, it only applies to females, it only applies to women, but that's not the case. It can happen to men and women, not just one and not just the other. So I think it's important for you to talk through your story, what you went through, how you were able to overcome and share, and then we can move into the Browning family and that topic, and then we can end on a really positive note of what you're up to now and those dreams and aspirations, which it seems to be you're hitting some of those dreams right now.
Trying to, yeah, absolutely.
Great.
I guess where could we start? I think you brought up an important point where I think there was this stigma, and I think this is really starting to die down quite a lot. Where I remember I would slowly open up to people about this when I was growing up, and one girl I did say that to. Said like, well, I didn't know that men could get raped. And I thought that was, kind of telling when I heard that. Now, in the years since then, we've had a lot of national news stories that have come out. You have the Penn State scandal and you have the Boy Scout scandal, and also, incidents with the Catholic Church where you've seen a lot of men go through sexual abuse, and these cases were widely publicized. So I think that stigma has really started to die down a lot. Now, I
Mhm.
think it can be challenging for a lot of men to open up and talk about that, and that certainly was the case for me initially, because I think and not only is it traumatic to talk about, but it's also very awkward to talk about. How do you just bring up sexual abuse to somebody in a normal conversation? And it's very hard without it either dampening the tone or darkening the tone and really, bringing the mood down a little bit. So I think those are some of the challenges that come when it comes to men trying to express themselves and get the treatment they need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And being traumatized for different reasons than what you have, that trauma, it doesn't 100% go away. It sticks with you and might come out at certain times and certain behaviors. So being able to overcome as much as you can, I think is I don't know, we're like fantastic, but to be able to do that, it takes a lot of work. It's not something that you have a sprained ankle and the ankle heals, and you can see that progress when something's happening consistently still in the mind. Like, oh, okay, like this is still here, but I want to continue to now, and instead of sharing what happened, you're sharing what happened, and you're providing a voice, as you mentioned, to be able to either stand up and talk to somebody about it. And it's not all bad. And I know from my experience with just therapy in general, sometimes people hear the word therapy and they're like, oh, you go to therapy. And it's like, well, I'm actually just really, to simplify, really just talking to somebody and sharing experiences, what's happening, and then the therapist, depending on how we're moving, they jump in and guide the conversation, or they affirm, or try to steer in a different direction. So that's I think important. Do you want to share a little bit about what you went through?
Right. So mine started when I was really young, and I would say, and I'm not talking about child young. I would
Right.
say preteen, kind of going through puberty. So puberty age was when it really started for me, and of course that's already a very weird time in any young person's life, because they're starting to experience sexual feelings for the first time in their life. They're starting to just really have a lot of changes with their bodies, and I'm trying to explain this without being awkward. Um,
Yeah, you're
but
fine.
so you're already going through this confusing time, and the person who was my abuser was going through a similar situation. It was somebody who was just a couple months older than me, I believe, or around a year older than me. And it started off very small. It starts off with you know them touching themselves while you're watching a movie in the room, and you just think none of it. But then it gradually gets worse to them asking you to touch them. That this person, I guess some of the early stuff was, he was making me watch pornography with him, and then ultimately that led to some more touching and some very uncomfortable situations. And this went on for a very long time. I lost count of how many times I had to go through this with this person. And then ultimately, I think I got fed up. I started confiding to a couple different people, and ultimately my parents started to find out about it. Then they eventually had enough and took matters in their own hands, and that's kind of how we got the situation over with. But
Mhm.
there were a lot of uncomfortable times. I mean, when you have to sit there and talk to your pediatrician and give them every single detail about what happened, because you have to tell them everything so they can tell you how to proceed from there. You have to get an AIDS test. You've got to get different type of testing to make sure you're okay and that nothing, you know, is wrong with you. And then just all that kind of bundles up. And then obviously it's, well, now what after this? And I think it can take a long time. For me, it did. I mean, there's still things that I am getting over when it comes to this, and I think that's the hard part. But I think just acknowledging the problem and acknowledging that this is something that you need to work on is the big step for me.
And it sounds like you were being supported when the time came to share about the situations and what was occurring. So that is, I guess, one positive to the situation, that your parents weren't, your pediatrician, they weren't brushing you off like, oh, okay, he's just saying things, and I think that's good, and I think people need to see that there are supportive people, supportive parents out there, doctors that are and will support what's going on. It is, I mean, it's awkward, and a lot of things that I talk about mental health related are awkward, and it's kind of just managing the situation and talking through it, and but knowing that things are still like they are and like they were, and really just trying to get through best you can, to have that support system is big. Can you touch on maybe just the support system that you've had kind of throughout your life from your family, with just different situations of when you need to talk to somebody, you could turn to them?
Oh yeah, well, I've got a big family. I would say about 50 or so cousins. I've got a godmother I'm very close with. I've got different cousins I'm close with, and it's a type of family where we're out of Carroll County, Maryland. It's a very rural part of Maryland, and it's kind of that town where there aren't a lot of secrets. And when it comes to my family, they kind of embody that, where we were the type of family where you did something wrong and you showed up at the next family function, somehow every single person knew about it, and you just had to bite the bullet and take the humiliation from everybody else. And that's kind of the situation that I'm in as a and there could be some positives to that, obviously a lot of positives, because I feel like I can confide in a lot of my family members, maybe not the exact same topic with every single person, but I found that there's a lot of people in my family I'm willing to talk to and able to talk to about things that are very uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people to talk to, and very awkward for a lot of people to talk about. And fortunately, I have a family where that's not the case, where these conversations aren't awkward, they're normal, and we've normalized them as a family, and we're able to share with each other. And we've been through a lot as a family, so we kind of have to be that way. We lost two cousins to overdoses in the last decade or so. I mean, two of them very recent. We've lost a lot of people along the way, so having that tight-knit support system is kind of necessary for us, and fortunately, I'm able to benefit from that.
For our listeners, for our viewers, if they or somebody they know is going through a similar situation regarding that, I mean, any type of abuse, we're talking about sexual abuse, but just abuse in general is not healthy and illegal and many other things. Would you say that first step that you may recommend to somebody who's going through it is confiding with their parents? Like, that would be maybe a first step, or what would you maybe say?
If you trust your parents enough, they should always be your first avenue. I think they're the ones who care the most about you, especially if you're in a loving home and your parents want what's best for you. They're going to take the right steps necessary to get the job done. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with your parents, I think you just have to find that person, and it can't be a friend, right? A friend can, well, maybe sometimes they can, but for me in middle school, if I confided to a friend about this, I don't think they're going to really know the right avenue to take. They could maybe spill this or leak this to a guidance counselor or something, but I think you need to find an authority figure and somebody who's in a situation where they might be able to at least figure out what the right thing to do is. A guidance counselor is obviously a go-to in schools. That's an easy person to confide to. The conversations are confidential, but if there's something that really needs to be addressed, they know the exact avenues to go through in order to address that. I think coaches can be great avenues for young people to reach out to. Boy Scout masters are people. I've got a very close relationship with my Scout master still to this day. And, if I was ever going through a situation like that again, I know he'd be the person to do the right thing. So somebody with that type of authority figure who could probably point you in the right direction, I think that's the first step in terms of finding out a way to get this away from you and move on the right way.
And we also have viewers and listeners that are college age, even potentially some high school students and parents. I would think maybe one of the questions might be, how has that impacted, if at all, your career path, your career choice, of being able to share that, just knowing how social media is that something that has helped or hindered, where you're at? And if somebody's afraid, like, oh my gosh, not only is so-and-so going to find out, and then if it goes public, and then I'm going to be affected maybe negatively for a job interview if I'm Googled or social media. Can you maybe walk through that process a little bit?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I never really went into this and said that if I talk about, my abuse history, that it's going to impact my job prospects one day. I don't think that's something I really have to worry about. But, I think in terms of what I chose to do as a career, there was one point I wanted to be a high school guidance counselor so I could help kids who were going through what I was going through. But then ultimately, I felt like my talents were better suited in an industry that involves writing. And that's also something I love to do. So that's kind of how I ended up doing this. But, when you're a journalist and you're a storyteller, you get a lot of opportunities to share those stories and to talk to people and bring their stories to life. And hopefully that story can, do what I'm trying to do, which is just impact one person and make them feel just a little bit better about themselves. I ain't trying to
Right.
I'm not going into this thinking that I'm going to be some famous, motivational speaker one day, but it's just about getting to that one person. And I think, in journalism and writing, whether it's through TV, radio, print, you have a lot of opportunities to do that where you can just reach that one person by either sharing somebody else's story or sharing your own.
I'm glad you talked about some of the mechanics behind media, which is writing, that might not be looked at as like, oh, I love to write. But was that something that it just became natural to you when you were going through your studies in school and you were getting good grades, or you just like sharing the story regardless of the grades, or how did that manifest itself?
I think I figured out pretty quickly I wasn't a math or science guy. So I think writing was definitely probably one of my better strong suits in school. It was one of those few things where I think it was sixth grade when I figured this out, that I think this was probably up my wall, was because, we sat down one day and you had to write about a situation where you felt better about yourself or something like that. And I wrote about like my cousin's dog. It was like a very simple story. And, the teacher kind of said like, hey, you were the top two in this class in terms of like what I like the most. And I was like, okay, well, it's good to know because I'm struggling in math and science right now. So
Yeah.
it's nice to hear that I'm actually doing something right. And then obviously I was big into history. And history in many ways is a story. It's the story of reality and what we've been through as a society and a world. So those two topics kind of were where the journalism side came into. I had a love for writing and I had a love for history. And I really kind of picked up that love for writing, I would say, it was really senior year of high school, where I had an English teacher who was very awesome in terms of just, making the class fun and giving us writing assignments that tested our skills and put us to the test. And then I was also in creative writing at the time, and I had a field day with that class almost every day. So I think those classes were really big inspirations for me wanting to write.
Yeah, I think that's great that you even during school you were still getting that support of, you're really good at this, you're doing well. And at that point, like you mentioned, where some other areas weren't as good or not doing it as well in the grades, and just having that, I think, is helpful for even a teacher or a counselor or anybody, even a parent, when they're parenting with their children, helping steer. We can't always just be like negative and be like, oh, well, you're doing this wrong and this wrong. It's like, oh, well, you're really good at this, and that was what you were able to grab onto. Was there a project that stands out that you just, going through your college years at Ole Miss, in journalism, where you were like, yeah, this is awesome. This is, you love what you're going to be doing and what you want to get into.
Oh, it was my first TV class where we were actually, kind of assigned to go out and actually do news stories.
Wow.
And, it wasn't like we were doing one every day, but it was kind of like this teacher would talk you through the process. This professor would talk you through the process. This is how a story works. This is how it's structured. And now, this is what you need to do to go out and do it. And then after I did a couple, I was like, okay, well, I can't wait till I'm doing my next one. And it became kind of a habit from there. And it got me really motivated. I was already pretty motivated when I was in school just because I was happy to be there. But after that, I was like, okay, I think I figured out what I want to do. And then it came internship time, started applying for different TV stations, and ended up landing my first internship in Memphis. And that was kind of a blast. So, I think the first TV class you take in school and you kind of figure out this is what you want to do. And if not, that's how people end up in PR. They take those TV classes, they don't like doing it, and then they go in the PR route if they're in the journalism school. But for me, I kind of was addicted to TV very quickly.
Wow. Yeah. Let's maybe shift topics, and then we'll return to the career and where you're at over the past couple of years and where you're at today. So you did mention your family is very close, and you've been through a lot, even recently, but especially when you were in your earlier years, not as and you mentioned having, being in rural, in the rural area where everybody kind of knows everybody in a sense. Was there a time in a situation where it garnered national attention for maybe not the not the best of reasons, and how that impacted you personally, and then with the sexual abuse that you had went through, like how those two things kind of came together, like whether that made you stronger or whether so.
Well, it wasn't long after the sexual abuse kind of it was starting to fade out, and I was kind of moving on from that when the Browning family tragedy happened. That for the viewers here and listeners is when there was a young man by the name of Nick Browning, and it was a very loving family, a family we were very close with. The father, John, was our scoutmaster. He was best friends with my parents, and so was his wife, Tammy, who was my mom's best friend. I considered her a mother, a second mother to me, especially outside of my home. And then they had two other sons named Greg and Ben Browning, who were easily some of the best friends I've ever had. Greg was best friends, without a doubt, drop dead best friend with my brother. And then Ben was like another younger brother to me. And Nick was the oldest. Nick Browning was the oldest. He was 2 weeks away from his 16th birthday when he decided he was at a friend's house. It was a big group of friends. I would say like 4 or 5 guys. And Nick kind of tells the guys, I'm going to go back and I'm going to steal my dad's car and we're going to go joyriding tonight. And so Nick goes back, and instead of stealing the car, he takes his father's gun and he shoots all 4 of his family members while they're sleeping.
Oh, wow.
And obviously this made national headlines. It was traumatizing for everybody in our community. I think, growing up in Cockeysville, it's a very diverse community. I didn't grow up in Carroll County. That's where my mom's side of the family lives. So okay. Cockeysville was a pretty diverse community. We have rural folks, a little bit of urban, suburban. It's really a diverse community. But the Brownings were very popular amongst everybody. I think everyone really loved them. And obviously with John being the scoutmaster, Tammy was heavily involved in PTA. It was really hard to find somebody who wasn't impacted by that. And I think it broke a lot of our hearts and also shocked a lot of us too, that something like this could actually happen.
I've never been through something like that. It just sounds like a very tough time to go through. And then I guess there was a time where the national media was at your school, and then you came out and
I don't remember seeing a lot of national cameras showing up when all that was going on. You'd see a couple articles here and there and see it get mentioned. But yeah, I mean, the day after the news broke and Nick was identified as a suspect and the family was identified as the victims, we had cameras everywhere outside the school. And I now that I am a reporter and I've been in that situation where I've got to cover a story like that, I would say that, they're fairly respectful. I talked to a couple of them, and, they used the nice soundbite I had about Miss Browning,
Okay.
saying that she was like a second mother to me. And, they didn't, sensationalize it. I felt like a lot of the reporting was very based on the facts. They let Nick's legal team speak for him. And you know, but it was crazy. And then, of course, when the funeral was going on, we had a report that the Westboro Baptist Church was going to be protesting
Uh,
outside the funeral. And fortunately, I believe the church took some actions to make sure that, they weren't allowed onto the property. And then the TV cameras didn't really give them any attention either, when all that was going on. So, yeah, I mean, that was my first exposure to the news industry, and it was definitely not my choice.
no, not at all. When you did speak with the media, was sharing your voice about the family, was that your thought when you did that? Just trying to find maybe a thread where it's like, okay, there's an opportunity where I can share positives about the family, and especially you mentioned his mother was like a second mother to you, and to share that. Did you feel that was that one of the reasons why you went over there, or?
I don't know. It was kind of just I was walking across the street and there happened to be cameras there and they wanted to talk
Okay.
to me, and I said yes. Um, but I think one thing that was not one thing I do remember that kind of gave me, and it was a moment I really needed. It was at the funeral. I was a complete train wreck during the whole thing,
Yeah.
and one of the speakers who was speaking on behalf of the family kind of mentions, oh, there was this phenomenal young man who said some very nice things about Tammy Browning on the news the other day, and that really meant a lot. And I thought that was like, oh yeah, I
Wow.
needed to hear that. So yeah,
Yeah.
you have moments like that. And then, the middle school actually opened up a garden to memorialize the family, a couple months later. And my brother ended up being on the news for that, as well as one of our good friends, Tiffer, who was also very close with Greg and Ben. And, it was nice to see a positive, outlook for the family when because Nick was going through court cases. So he was ending up in the news every once in a while up until ultimately his sentencing. So eh, to have a break and we could actually talk about the family and see the family being talked about in a positive way, those were moments that were great.
Yeah. Looking at some of your past interviews, you mentioned if you got a call from Nick that you would take his call, and that's kind of that journalist side of your mind, as well as you forgave him at some
I
point.
did. Yeah.
Uh, can you maybe walk through that faith and how that was helpful in what you were going through, and maybe help change your outlook?
Yeah. I mean, forgiving Nick was probably, it might be the hardest thing I ever had to do. Um, it was something that when I got involved with Young Life, and I got involved with my faith a little bit more, and that kind of really helped the healing process. A lot of them were very quick to forgive him,
Okay.
and I felt that that was going to take a little bit more time for me. And ultimately, I forget what exactly it was. I think it was just one of those moments where you hear like a really good sermon, and I guess the Young Life program, they kind of do that when they send you to camp. They give you like this little send off at the end where you're supposed to have this epiphany and all that. And I guess I kind of did, where I just said, you know what? I'm never going to get over this. I mean, you never will, but I'm never going to be able to move forward if I don't forgive Nick. And I don't know what if forgiveness entails, other than just at the time it was just saying it, and saying and being able to say it. I think really did lift a lot of weight off the shoulders, and I needed to do it. Um, I was hesitant, obviously, and I think there's maybe some days I still am. And Nick's now apparently into writing. I've done some research on what he's been up to. He does a lot of writing. I think he's actually won some awards.
Oh.
And I've read some stuff about, where he explains what he did. And based off the writing, he doesn't make any excuses. He's aware of the sins he's committed, Now I don't know if he's genuine or not. I'm not quite sure. I think I'd have to see him. I'd have to see him in person for myself to make that judgment, to see if he's truly, changed and true, see if he's worthy of forgiveness. Ultimately, that's not going to be my decision. That's
Right.
going to be between him and God.
Right.
But I've made my decision to forgive him. I'm very happy I did. And yeah, like I said, it was very hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, I really commend you on that. I think there's relationships or things that I haven't forgave the people many years past, and so to be able to do that, I'm sure it help provide a little bit of peace to your mind that it's still always going to be there, but you're able to move forward given the circumstances. So you've done a lot of, I guess, after Ole Miss, your internship, you've done a lot of traveling with your work. Is that something that you plan to do? And were there any relationships, the significant others that you had that were like, no, Ryan, like you can't go to this city or this state? I'm just wondering if there was any of those push and pull, because I received some of that with my now wife when I moved away for a job to Houston versus being here in Ohio, and she's like, I'm not moving down here, and so it was, making those decisions of like what's the most important. So could you maybe walk through maybe just that process of maybe it's the industry and moving up and getting to where
Right.
where you needed to be?
Yeah, it's definitely a due-paying industry, especially the first couple years. You kind of, in many ways, you have to take your foot in the door job, and you kind of got to do whatever it takes. And I think I've got the more interesting due-paying resume, because I probably have done almost everything you could do in this industry, from doing, just reporting to weather to being a photographer to producing my own stuff. Being a news anchor, doing sports and doing highlights every once in a while. So I feel like I've been exposed to quite a lot that this industry has to offer. Stations go through a lot. They're short staffed. Pay is not very good right off the bat, and you sometimes you're not living in the place you want to live in. I've spent a lot of time away from family in this industry. Unfortunately, we lost my two cousins and lost an uncle while I was living very far away and wasn't making enough money to be able to make emergency trips home.
Right.
So, I always thought I'd have no issues, living far away. And that was kind of something I learned very quickly. It's not as easy to do in the real world compared to college. College,
All
it's easy to do because you get those long breaks, right? So you
right.
get to go home for, a couple weeks or a couple months in many cases too. But that wasn't the case in the media industry, and it can be tough on your mental health, especially when you're working odd hours. You're not you know you're working weekends. You're probably not making great money, and that can really be draining on you. Plus, it's already just a stressful industry in general, from just what's expected of you as a journalist, but also some of the stuff you see. You see a lot of people go through a lot of bad situations, and you see, uh, you know, your community and sometimes on fire, and that's hard to see. And you see a lot of people suffering. So those things can all add up, and I think that's the real challenge when you first get into news. And then obviously you have people who doubt you, and you have people who criticize you a lot, and the criticism a lot of time is needed. You need to be coached, you need to be told how to get better. But there's a difference between criticism and a toxic work environment, which some people can experience, and of course there's a lot of people in America who experience that with their employers. And again, there's people who will doubt you and not think you're able to go to this next job or that next job. And some of it is, it's honest feedback, and that's fair.
Yeah.
But other times they're wrong, and you got to prove them wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad the way you walk through that process. That yeah, I mean, there's going to be people that are giving constructive criticism, and then there's going to be people that are just taking it a whole new level. And that whole proving wrong, if it's something that you're passionate about and you like doing, it's a kind of a goal. Like, okay, well, I'm going to achieve that goal. I'm going to get to that point at some length of time, and to have those milestones kind of personally and professionally, and really taking that positive and maybe consider negative. I'm just thinking with social media being how it is, it being just so easy to share negative feedback that is like, oh, we should have did this, and I don't know, you're taking the stand on this side, and you're on the left, and you're on the right, and you're all these different areas. It's like, okay, well, some of that may be me, and other, some of it's the story, right? You're going through situations and meeting people at maybe some of the worst times that they've been through, or trying to get information out, so the public or the community is well informed. And I think that has social media been part of that for you? Or do you look at comments, or how much do you get into that?
Get a troll every once in a while, at least in my situation. I think I got one actually this week based off a question I asked at the White House press briefing. But I mean, I think my last employer, they had a really good point where they said to us, like, look, these accounts are trying to elicit emotion out of you. They're trying to elicit, a response from you. Just don't acknowledge them. It's that simple, especially when it's an account that doesn't have a real name. The person doesn't have a profile picture, and it makes no sense. So why would you get into a fight with somebody when it very well could just be a fake person? So you're always going to get that when it comes to social media. But, there's a lot of reporters out there who have really benefited from social media, been able to build a following outside of themselves. And obviously I've utilized it to talk about some of the stuff we're talking about here today. So, everything's got its pros and cons. I think as long as you're smart about it and know how to use it the right way and don't let it consume your life with negativity, you can use it.
Right. No, it sounds like you got a good balance of knowing when to do your thing, and then when to kind of step back and let it just go.
Now, of course, there is another aspect to it where social media is just giving us one more thing we have to do as journalists, because it's so, in many ways, it's very vital to our news products. It's how you get people to the websites, it's how you get people to watch the newscast. So there's another negative there where it's just one more thing we have to worry about. So that's unfortunate.
Right. Yeah. You complete a story, submit it, and then it's another set of steps, and it might not be the hardest thing, but it's just something additional, another 2 or 3 things that you have to do that can wear over time. So the position you're at now, you're in Washington D.C. You're on Fox News Radio. You're able to, I guess, continue that jack of all trades of when you need to go in certain environments and ask questions, hot topics. People are fired up. How do you think your past and your experience has helped give you the experience to where you're at now with some of the divisive things that are going on in the world, in the United States, some of those experiences that you've been through, and you've kind of built a little bit of tolerance and know when to do what you need to do, and when to take a step back?
Well, I would say I've always tried to be as professional as possible with every job I do, and this one's no different. I mean, it's the big leagues. You're in Congress. You're dealing with some of the most powerful people in the world, whether it's the President of the United States or different members of the House and Senate. I try to be as professional as possible. I have a code of ethics when it comes to being a journalist. I like to be fair. I like to be balanced, and I like to. But I feel like I have an obligation to do this the right way. I think journalism is, though, it's protected in the United States Constitution for a reason. And I don't think that that designation has ever fallen short on my mindset when it comes to being a journalist here. But this is, a dream come true for me. I think that's one of the easiest parts, is that I'm just motivated to be here just because it's so awesome to be here. Obviously, Fox News played a big role in getting my interest in politics when I was in college, because we had it on a decent amount in school because of Shepard Smith, a famous Ole Miss alumni. He was working at the network back then. I believe I had class right before his one show came to an end during the day. So
Okay.
I watched a lot of Shepard Smith, and then I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to handle being a political reporter. I thought like politics were complicated, and this was something that kids who are law school bound are the only ones who can talk about this stuff, and the kids who are the valedictorians are the only ones who can talk about this stuff. But if you just put the work in and you're willing to learn and you have that interest, you know, it, I think politics should be for everyone. I think everyone should be involved in the political process. I think everyone should research their leaders, see what they're doing, see what issues matter to them the most. And I think that as a journalist, your job is to simplify this stuff for people. And I think that we that type of opportunity is kind of one that people don't really consider as much.
Yeah, and I think to your point of liking to tell the story and liking to write, that's what you're doing is you're taking a set of facts and circumstances, experiences, you're putting that together, so it's instead of it being easy to follow, easy to understand for a professor or an instructor, now you're doing that for many different stakeholders
Yeah,
in it.
you're doing it for grandma who's watching at home. It's kind of how you have to look at it.
Yeah. Uh, you don't have to get into like, super specific details. I'm just wondering from an interview process of, were there multiple interviews? Did you have to submit a portfolio? Did you have to do an audition? I'm just wondering for people that are going through journalism classes and they're continuing that way of, okay, I'm hearing maybe some of my friends in business and other industries are like, okay, well, I got to get my resume and I got to get my portfolio. And is it similar in the industry?
It's the resume, but then you also have a demo tape,
Okay.
and some people call it a resume reel, which is like pretty much your best highlights is a way to put it. You put some stuff of you on air, you put some of your full stories in there, and you kind of try to sell yourself
Yeah.
to a potential employer. So that's kind of how the process works, and that's probably the biggest part of any job interview process is if you have a good reel, you're probably going to get a call back, and that's kind of everything else kind of falls after that. But the resume reel is very first. That's how you get the potential employer's attention, and then how you interview after that, how you mesh with the employer and the potential employees that you're going to be working with. I think that all comes second, but it's the resume reel. It's all that is the big thing in news.
Yeah, and it's showing what you've done. So there's things you've learned and processes, and that's great. But at the end of the day, the employer wants to see what your product, how you go through the process, and again, some of the stories and different angles that you've covered, so they can get an idea of what's Ryan going to be like when he's on air. How's he going to share? Is he articulate? And those might be more things that are more important to your industry. I would think of being, in that storytelling of being able to tell the story, but have it be understandable to grandma at home. And being on the radio, there's not that visual component in that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, radio is a different world. It definitely is. A lot of the stories are shorter. They're a lot more to the point. But then also at Fox, we have a really strong podcast group here. So that's kind of given me an opportunity to talk to people about issues that matter and kind of have a longer form of discussion about it. So, we've got one coming out this weekend. It's going to be on the IRS. More people in poor areas getting audited than people who are wealthy. And so I think that's going to,
Yeah.
it's a shocker to a lot of people, and it's also a concern to a lot of people. So to be able to bring attention to that subject and get somebody who knows a lot about it, we actually got somebody from Ole Miss to talk about it, believe it or not. Totally an accident. I didn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
But to be able to talk about those issues and have a long form way of doing so, I think is really a great opportunity.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you are able to do is something that not a lot of people ever get to experience in their whole life of being able to travel with the President of the United States.
Yeah.
What's the experience like? Like when do you find out? Is it a last minute, like where you come in, this morning and you find out like, okay, I'm traveling for this particular thing, and here's when all the arrangements and all that, or how's that?
Yeah, so in the White House we have a pool rotation. So pretty much it's one reporter who's assigned to like travel with the president, and they're supposed to report back a lot of the details to all the other pool reporters who are there. You send back the video feed if you're in TV. I'll send back the audio feed onto a system so that the reporters at the White House can get that from all the different radio networks. So we have a schedule that's released ahead of time, and it kind of tells us, who's traveling when or what network's going to be traveling. So the network will assign a person to do that. And then on the day, obviously the first time I did it, it was surreal. Yeah. And sometimes it still is kind of surreal to be traveling with the President of the United States. But then again, there's also the mindset you get into where I've got a job to do.
Right.
I've got to do it. And all you think about is getting the job done. And then you kind of have to take a step back. Wait a minute. I just forgot I'm traveling with the president. Like, okay, this is cool.
Yeah.
But I've been trying to find that balance of trying to just take it in and enjoy it rather than just get too caught up in the job and all that. Obviously, my first mindset is to get the job done because that's what my network's paying me to do and what my network's counting on me to do. But then after that, I think there are still plenty of times when I can take a step back and be like, man, I'm at the White House. This is awesome.
Absolutely. So what was it like the first time that you were in the press briefing room being called on by the press secretary? Obviously, you're prepared with your questions. You're going through your process like you always do. But just maybe that moment, was that a little bit different when they said Fox?
The first time I had a seat in there, I had a question ready to go. I wasn't like, raising my hand after every question to see what was going to happen. I was kind of like, okay, she probably won't call me today. It's my first day, just get the information and we'll go from there and cover, whatever happens in the briefing. And then she calls on me, and I think like it was like the first time I had raised my hand, and I was just like, huh, what? And then she goes, yeah, like, and I think you can even see it on my Instagram. Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary, kind of gives like a nod, like, yeah, just called on you. Well, here we go, and just started talking, kind of tunnel vision from there. You're asking the question, and yeah, it was pretty cool. And then you realize that, of course, every single thing at those briefings is recorded, so you almost have to keep a straight face the entire time you're in that room.
Okay.
Because if you make a funny face, there's a chance that it might be on camera. So that's something to keep in mind.
Wow. And one thing you also get to do is I saw a post where you're outside the White House and Marine One is landing and it's super windy. What is that like? Maybe the first time of like, oh my gosh, like it's more to it than just a helicopter. Like it's a symbol.
Well, the first time I saw Marine One take off, it was the day I got my credential to go into the White House and get clearance to go in the White House. And Jared Halpern, who's our chief White House correspondent on the radio side here, is kind of like, okay, well, we're here now, and there's going to be a takeoff in 30 minutes. You want to go watch it? I was like, of course I want to go watch it. So we, they gather the whole press, and they send them into the South Lawn, which is right by the Rose Garden. Then the president will either come out from the Oval Office or come out from the I guess the main entrance to the White House there. And the press will shout questions. He might take them, he might not, but he ultimately boards Marine One. And then, my coworker just kind of looks at me and goes, you might want to have your feet set. He's like, this is going to be powerful.
Yeah.
And that helicopter, people don't realize how strong that helicopter is till you're just a couple feet away from it when it's taking off, because that wind will blow. And it is a massive force there. And I mean, I've seen stools go flying and trees are brushing like crazy. It's your sport coat will turn into a parachute. It's intense, and it's also extremely cool. And after it was over, I kind of asked a couple people, like, does it get old after a while? And then one guy nods yes, and another guy goes, I don't know, I've been here over a decade. It's still pretty cool to me.
Oh, that's awesome. And that really plays into your at your dream job, and
Mhm.
can you maybe just, you touched a lot on the job itself, but being able to look back like, okay, this many years ago I was in school at Ole Miss, and this is, that where you're looking at maybe those naysayers or some of the people and you're like, okay, I'm doing what I was meant to do, and it makes me feel extra good, and I don't want to say extra good, but
Oh yeah.
just being able to have that hurdle and be like, I don't have to worry about this little thing, this topic.
It's always going to come back to this moment when I was 15, a couple of days after, the Brownings were murdered, where we had our first scout meeting, um, post no longer having John Browning as our scoutmaster, losing two scouts who were probably the most loved kids in the scout troop, and then also a mom who was very, involved with the troop as well. And, sitting at the end, funny thing about this whole thing, my term as senior patrol leader, aka like the main scout, was just starting.
Oh, okay.
So this was my first meeting as senior patrol leader, and I'm a train wreck, and I'm like, well, what? Like, I'm supposed to be in a leadership role right now. Like, I don't know how this is gonna work. And we also had a new scoutmaster, and his name was Jim Rafferty. He's got a book out where he talks about leading the scout troop. It's called Leader by Accident. You got to check it out. It's awesome. And first thing he did when he saw me was we gave each other a hug, and I don't know, it was just right there and then we knew we had the right guy. We knew this was our scoutmaster, and we knew we had a true leader here. But I remember sitting at the front of this entrance and greeting every single mom, every single scout that walked in. A lot of hugs, a lot of tears, and we just kind of all sat around this circle. We had a couple grief counselors there. I mean, it was just the most heartbreaking scene you can see. Just everyone just devastated. I was a wreck. A lot of people were wrecks, and we kind of shared some strong. We tried to share memories, good ones, and they kind of eventually let the parents go upstairs, and they would figure out what was going to happen to the troop from there on out. And you have all the kids together, and we're just all kind of talking and trying to remember the good times with Greg and Ben. And I think, in that moment, we were wondering what the heck was going to happen to the troop then. We thought it might die off, but I think pretty quickly, especially when we sat down there all together, we're like, oh, this ain't going to happen. We're making this work. It's going to be hard. We're going to be frustrated. We're going to be grieving. We're all going to be traumatized, but we're going to make this troop stronger, and we're going to pull through this together. We don't know what it's going to take, what it's going to involve, but I think the first thing we knew is that as long as we had each other and we did it with love, we were going to make it work. And I owe my life to those kids. I owe my life to those parents who refused to let our troop die and refused to let me get lost, because there were times I hit rock bottom. And I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to graduate high school, go to college, all that. I was so just bummed out on the right now. And I was still traumatized from what happened to me when I was being sexually abused as a preteen. Now to losing my friends as a teenager and having to be in this somewhat of a leadership position. I don't know if I made a difference in that troop making it. I give a lot of the credit to Jim Rafferty and a lot of the kids who were underneath, who were scouts with me, and of course a lot of the other parents who stepped up to the plate too. So, I can always think back to that moment and think back to then and what we were going through then, and to be in a situation where I think I'm a happy person. I've still got a lot of problems, and I'm still a very messed up person in terms of I make a lot of mistakes. I'm a sinner. I'll be working on trying to be perfect for the rest of my life, and I will always fall short. But I have a reason to be motivated, and the fact that I get to live a happy life, I think right now, and be in a position like this one, I think is a victory. And of course, you probably heard the saying, it takes a village. Well, I think, yeah, this is a strong example of, if you have a support system and people who care about one another, there is a lot you can accomplish.
Wow, that's so powerful, and really, you transcended time. You hit rock bottom, and to be where and have the opportunity that you have is, I think, an inspiration to a lot of people, because, I mean, myself included, making mistakes and just craziness, like, okay, just gotta kind of work through it. But to know that their life, in a sense, does continue, and you can follow your passion, what you love to do, and work towards that, and that there will be some dark days, but there are also going to be days where you said, like, you're relatively happy, and being a happy person in any day and age, especially now, says a lot. And I just want to thank you for your time, for sharing so in depth and detail, and covering everything from being the sexual abusing at a young age to where you're at today. I think it's awesome to me to see someone else to be able to make that leap and jump, and to do it in stride. You're not boastful about it. You do your, like I said, you do your job. And if your job is to cover the President of the United States and travel in Air Force One, then you're going to do it. But you're going to have that tunnel vision on what your job is, and you take some of those sights and those experiences, and that just has to be a good feeling, a great feeling. So I just want to thank you for your time today. We'll grab a couple of pictures afterwards. I just have an outro to do. But thanks so much, Ryan, for sharing so much, and congratulations on the successes that you've had and where you're at, and being in that position. It's got to be awesome feeling.
No, I really appreciate it, Justin. This was very rewarding, and thank you so much for letting me on and letting me share, because I like the opportunity to do so. I think there's hopefully something here that somebody can learn. I don't know how many people we're going to reach with this, or how many people I can impact, but obviously, I'm just trying to make that one person a little bit more comfortable with themselves. And if sitting down and doing this interview does that, then I think we got ourselves a winner.
I think so too. Wow, that's a good note to end on. So I want to not only thank Ryan for his time today, I want to thank our viewers, our listeners, for spending time with us today on a bonus episode of the Voices for Voices podcast. Until next time, I am Justin Allen Hayes, and I hope you have a great day and be a voice for you or somebody in need.